A refresh to the Cybertruck rear view mirror.
On today's video, I'll be installing a digital mirror inside my Cybertruck, which will replace the original stock one that it came with. If you've had your Cybertruck for any amount of time, you know that this is just not a good option and you have to find something else. About 2 months ago, I installed a different digital mirror in my Cybertruck. I loved it. I posted online. It's gotten a few thousand views. I'm going to show you a new way I found to reroute this cord to make it a little bit simpler, a little bit easier to install. You've already seen that last video. Stick with me anyway, because I think this one's going to be quite a bit different. In addition, it's going to highlight some of the differences between the hand show model and the Tesstudio model and help you determine which one might be the best fit for you. Now, if you're looking for a full video comparison between this S92 camera and the hand show model, I need you to subscribe to the channel because I didn't want to make this video an hour long. I will do an in-depth comparison on a video later this week. Now we're ready to get started. The first step in this process, you have to remove the old rear view mirror. This is done very easily with one torque screw right up the middle of it. But before you can get to that, you have to pop off this one little piece of plastic on the back side of the mirror. Before we start installing the new camera, we will have to move this small plastic shroud that's behind all the brains going to this little rear view mirror. Be very careful taking this off because there are some very small, delicate wires right on the other side of this that will control several important things like the GPS system in your truck. This is where you're going to see the first difference between the two cameras. The previous install, you got your power from right here behind the rear view mirror. On this install, you're going to get your power from somewhere else totally different in the truck, which we'll get to in a few moments. So we're only removing this cover to give power to the mirror that we're going to get from another spot in the truck, which is actually going to make it slightly easier because there's less connections made under this plastic shroud where there's already tight and not a lot of bonus room.
Two separate pieces of plastic here, they're going to have to come down. Make sure you remove your visor because the center column it connects to actually has to come down in addition. Use your little trim tool to pull this down from the front, working your way back to the back until both of these pieces come loose and hang down.
Before we go putting this up into place, let me show you exactly how you're going to want the wires to go through the mount.
This little piece of plastic is going to slide into this bracket. So you have 3 wires. Make sure these wires are tucked as towards the camera as much as you can, starting with the smaller ones. So you can see here, you have this little gap. You want to fill this gap with wires, meaning hold that one in there, then get the second smallest one, the medium-sized one, and then lastly the large one. The reason being, you still have to put the little white plastic of the actual housing into this also, so you'll want these kind of pulled snug. The next bit of advice I'll give you is try to attach this as much as you can to the plastic, and then all at once in this one big swoop push this back up into place. But first, you're going to run the 2 wires, are going to go back to the power supply, and the one's going to run to the rear camera out through the passenger side of this first.
So as you can see here, I fished the wires from the outside in through the center of this little shroud and pulled them all tight, and then pulled the 2 that are going to the back out through this side passenger corner.
So now with the camera attached to the little plastic piece kind of put together there, then I'll snap the whole thing back up in place together.
Now I'm going to show you again from a previous video what I did to put together the little connections to connect the front camera.
So I located my front-facing camera, and rather than run my wire through the hole, I just made the connection here inside and then looped all the wires up together. Now mine is yellow, yours could be any color, but the connection is obvious, it just clips in right together. And then I ran the front-facing camera just out the edge lip, which you'll see later in the video.
Next piece here is different also than my last install. I'm going to make one small edit to this plastic shroud here that's going to make my install a whole lot easier. First trip around, I did not do this and it was installed just fine, so you wouldn't have to, but I'd recommend doing this. It is going to cause some very slight damage to this shroud, but you'll only be able to see it from the passenger side. And really, if you look really close, it's already in a dark spot. And as you see here, it's going to really blend in, and I don't think anyone's going to notice.
So looking at the finished product there, you can see I'm going to run wires out of that corner down along that column. So I just take some diagonal cutters and nip off the corner of this.
By doing this, I create just enough space that I can run these 2 wires out from behind the mirror, down this column, and be able to make my connections eventually up in this little felt piece of trim up near the roof. Having this little corner removed gives me enough space to get by. As you can see here, it still looks really nice when done. So as you can see here, the damage you cause is so minimal, and you can't even tell, and you'd only ever be able to see this from the passenger seat. I'm going to run my wire to my radar detector, which you may or may not have, out the front of this shroud. I'm also going to run the cable that's going to go to my front-facing camera out the front. This step is slightly different than the directions would have you do it, but it's also the same way they did it last time, and I'm convinced this is the best way to do it. There's no clips along the front, so if this is pushed down a little bit, it's just between the plastic and the glass, and you'll never see it and never notice it, and it makes it a whole lot easier and cleaner than running a wire along the side. Your next step, as I sit here in the passenger seat, is to run those wires from along here where you just ran it before, and you're gonna run it through this little velvet piece above your head into your door. Now this velvet piece pops out really easy. You can use your little trim tool, but you're basically just gonna get up in between this little gap. You have enough room to actually put your finger up behind here, and you could pull this down pretty easily with just the strength of your fingers. And I go ahead and pop it down even more all the way closer to the door. So now we have two separate little wires stubbed up into this roof compartment. One of them's gonna go down here to the power supply, and the other one's gonna go to the back of the truck to give you your rear view camera. So now with this little trim here loose, you're gonna see the two wires that you just fed from behind your shroud area that now we're gonna have to make connections up in here. Now the online directions you'll get will tell you to make those two connections up here in the shroud, but it's so tight up there, I'm choosing to make connections up here, which I think you'll agree with me when you try it is much easier. When we get to that, we have to decide which one we want to do first. The one that goes to the backup camera, or we can do the one that goes down to the power. The order in which you choose to do this doesn't really matter, but I'd recommend getting the power first, and I'll explain that why in just a minute. This cord you see here is what's going to be passing the power. It's going to pass it from this cord here through this into the camera. We're going to get this from the DC current of the truck. So if you chose, you could connect the two power lines together, but I didn't want to do that just yet, and I'll go into that later. So I put the wires as close as I could together, tucked them in tight, and then pushed this trim mostly back up into place. I left it open down just a little bit so I could fish the wire out there by the glass. I use that little trim tool to tuck that wire in between the trim and the glass all the way down, but be very careful because this cord could be very sensitive. Once I get those wires completely fed down here by the glass, that's going to bring us to the corner where we're going to use our tool to kind of tuck it back in behind here and eventually behind this little white and into the compartment here in the corner.
Using your trim tool, pushing forcefully yet very carefully.
Next thing to do is we're gonna have to get this wire down below here into some harnesses that here below the dash. I had this apart just maybe a week or so ago when I installed my C9 screen, also from Tesstudio. So I'm gonna pop out this little panel here and you'll see this whole little bottom clip is gonna come out. Just a little connection, one click,
And then the second clip, and then you're gonna go ahead and pull it out and down at the same time until it's removed. And then pull out this trim panel that goes down to the floor. Then you're going to pull back this little carpet lined part down by your floorboard. And you're looking for this little blue plug, which is called your AMD wire. Now you're going to be looking for this little light blue 2-part harness. Now if you notice, I'm pushing this little tab, pulling out a white one.
So that white harness you saw there was from my C9 screen.
If you've never tapped into this plug before, it's going to be light blue like this originally. You're going to pull this harness out of the little plug in the truck. Then you're going to use this little T cable that's coming from your mirror, put one side into that blue harness you pulled out and the other side back up into the blue of the truck. So if you are using that C9 screen and this rear view mirror, here's how you would do it. You're just going to plug this white cable of the C9 screen into the white of the mirror you just pulled out, and then put that white back up into the light blue section on the truck. Here's one more look closer up what mine looks like, where it's actually teed 2 different times.
That larger white harness we just hooked up is what they call the AMD sensor. That's what gives it control to the car. But now we actually have to give it power. That's what this little T outlet's going to be. Right in here, you can see I actually got your little white Tesla sticker labeling it. This is where you're going to be able to get your DC voltage from the car. I'm going to push this little tab in here on the outside, and it's going to unplug. Just like before, this is going to tee in. So you can see here, you got the male. It's going to go into the female, just like this. Push it until it clicks. And then you're going to reconnect the side you just pulled out back into this of the car to give you your power.
Then went ahead and snapped both these separate pieces of plastic trim back on, and then used my little trim tool to tuck the little rubber flaring back around.
So now that I've connected my power supply down below, I can go ahead and mate these two wires up here together. Now I hadn't done this yet because I was worried that if I put power to it while I was pushing those wires into place, I might short something out. What I have left now is just this little green and yellow wire to connect to the extension cord going back to my rear camera. Now, before I run this wire all the way back, I'm going to push this in together here, and I'm going to test it just to make sure everything's working before I go through the trouble of tucking this cord back into all these nooks and crannies. And that's exactly what I did. I went ahead and grabbed the whole extension cord, still all wound up here, and connected my camera to it right here in the seat. And as you can see here, I am working. There we go. So now, of course, I've unhooked the 2 extension cords. Now, what I'm going to do now, though, is I'm going to fish this extension cord back in through the door. You'll see here in a minute before we end up eventually making this connection back up here in the ceiling. The next thing I'm going to recommend doing here is pulling down this little plastic shroud all the way around. This is going to make it a whole lot easier. I'm also going to pull it down in the passenger door. But you're going to run this power supply down all the way through the door, down in the corner of the inside of the door, underneath here. We're going to remove this little flaring. We're going to squeeze it in between the flarings. We're We're gonna go through a little spot in the back bumper, and then lastly back around to the top of the license plate.
One thing I'm gonna do different on this install that I did a whole nother way on the other one is this little wire here, as you can see, I ran through here up over this little plastic and it got kind of tucked back behind this little weather stripping. Now that was fine. The problem was, one of you pointed out that I was going over the airbag. You can kind of see here this little cream colored thing all the way up through here is my airbag. Now I do have space, so this time I'm gonna go up over the airbag.
I just used my finger to create a little bit of space between the airbag and the roof of the car. Then I went ahead and slide this cord through. Now I already have that felt trim piece on the roof of the truck removed, so I'm able to grab this cord with my right hand and pull it through while fishing it through with my left hand.
So this is the next thing that I'm gonna do quite a bit different than what I did the previous time. As you can see here, I was able to run this underneath the airbag, but still just over this little lip, and then kind of tucked it around in there a little bit like this. So once I was able to push all this trim back up into place, you could hardly see it, but I still didn't love it. I thought I could do better. So essentially what I want to do is to try to create some kind of a gap or a hole to be able to pass that cord through here. But the problem is, when I look at this from the bottom, it's really thick right through here until right here it gets a little bit thinner. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a hole to be able to pass this wire through. So while it's probably the easiest thing to do is just to notch a little thing up into there, I don't wanna do the easy way. I'm gonna go ahead and drill a hole. Again, I did not do this the first time, so you would not have to do this and it'd be just fine. I just think this is the best way to do it. So I went ahead and found a drill bit that's basically the same size as the little head of my extension cable that's going back into my car. But what I've decided to do to hide this even a little bit better is I have this little rubber piece of trim here. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this back. As you see there's a little barb fitting that I'm gonna pry out to where once I move this back, I'm gonna make my hole way back here in the corner. The thought behind this is, once I have this little piece of rubber removed, it's gonna create a space where that big hole I have to make to be able to fit the head of the extension cord through, I'm gonna be able to hide that a little bit when I put this back into place, and nobody will ever know there's a wire going through it.
So I pulled this little rubber back and used a rivet removal tool and go ahead and popped it right out. So this genius move to drill the hole here, I find out is actually through the aluminum frame. So it's pretty tough drilling. It took a while. I worked through 4 or 5 bits, staging them up little by little, but it was some tough drilling. But all said and done in the end, it did come out pretty good. I eventually had my hole just wide enough that the head of the extension cord would just barely fit in, as you can see here. Once I put this little triangular piece of trim back down, you can hardly see the cord at all, and it covers about half that hole. And with all the weather stripping back in, totally gone. So as I said at the beginning of the video, I had a camera very similar to this in about a month ago. So while you'll see me fishing this through, I'll be pulling out the old wire. So I'm just gonna talk through what I'm doing. I'm carefully yet forcefully pushing in using this little included orange trim tool, this little wire all the way down underneath the weather stripping, beside the little rear bollard, and I'm cutting in just behind a little piece of trim, sticking in the corner, then riding this all the way down to the ground. I'll eventually have to pull off this rear fender, which just pulls straight off. I'll then run the wire in between the wheel well and the little plastic molding that the rear fender sticks onto.
The last time I ran this in a hollow underneath here, back behind the hitch. I'm realizing now that was probably more work than I needed to, so here's the much easier route. Still tucked underneath this little lip of plastic, you can tuck this cord all the way down behind, and if you can see up through this angle, there's a big void up here where you can kind of get this wire wrapped all the way behind and keep it up top all the way to the back to where I'm gonna mount my new camera. So per my urging, I told Tesstudio if they were gonna do this, give me a bracket that I can clip on the back of my license plate. So if you watched my previous video, you saw I took a screw and put it right through this bracket that I kind of retrofitted and just screwed it into my license plate. This bracket here on the new style here comes with this little bracket here, but this is just gonna clip right on top of that license plate, and it's gonna hold back just like this. And with me running the cord now up along the back, I no longer need to drill this hole like I did before, just a much simpler, easier way. So thank you to Tesstudio for updating your brackets.
So then I connected the extension cord to the camera itself, went ahead and slid it behind that license plate and stuck it into place. Then I went ahead and gathered all my extra wire from around the corner until I could eventually zip tie it all up into a bundle. Here's another look for a better angle where you can see I kind of ran it up over top of this lip, and then from the camera back down to the corner, there's a nice little groove it can fit in.
So you might be asking, why do we need to put it on top of the license plate? Why not somewhere down lower? And I'll tell you exactly why. I've got a hitch here, so I couldn't have this on the plastic shell. I can't have it on the bottom of the receiver. One of the benefits of this camera is you can see in reverse when your tailgate is down. This is your camera. So if your tailgate were down with lumbered, you're looking straight down on the ground. It's mounted right here on the top of the plate. It still lets me see with this all the way down. So when you're going to install yours, go ahead and test position with the tailgate down to make sure it's going to work in both positions. And the reason I did it on the top of the plate and not on the bottom is I'm here in Colorado where I get snow several times a month. I didn't want it down here at the base of the plate because I'd been worried about snow piling up.
After I shot my video, we got some snow, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to show you my camera system. So as you can see here, I haven't messed with this. So the fact that the camera is actually cut in still lets it show out a little bit. And you can see here how I have the snow buildup. If I mounted this camera anywhere else but right where it's at, it would be ineffective for me. And again, this bracket came included in this Tesstudio design. It did not come with my previous mirror design. So while I will do a complete comparison video between this S92 camera from Tesstudio and the other popular one out there in the market, that'll be in a video that'll drop later this week, so please subscribe. I do want to point out a couple really cool features though. I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't show you before I left off this video. One really simple but cool feature is, if you'll notice in the back of this Tesstudio model, you have that little photo sensor. What that is it's sensing light. So when it's brighter at your front windshield, it'll brighten up your camera. When it gets dark, it'll dim it down. Makes it really safe for evening driving. One really small yet really valuable inclusion Tesstudio makes is they include this little mini SD card, a 64 gig, in with this camera purchase, so you don't have to run to the store and get one. It comes included. Another really cool feature that this camera has that my last one did not. So as I touch it here, you'll see these little options come across the bottom. I can record or take pictures real time. So if you're wondering, why do I need a front-facing camera? If nothing else, this can be it. So as I touch this here, you can see I just touched that little picture sign, and you can see up close here, it took a picture. I can also record in real time. So as I just hit recording, it's now recording. So all this footage here that you see now is being recorded to this SD card up in the top. You also have the option from the screen to turn the microphone off or on as far as when you're recording. So if you wanted to hear what the people inside your cabin were saying, on. If not, turn it off. If you're a content creator like myself, I can click to record in real time and find out what's happening in front of me, behind me, or on the split screen. I can record and talk to what's happening on both screens at the same time. I also want to take just a minute to point out the camera resolution difference between the stock cameras in your Tesla and the picture you get on this Tesstudio screen. Comparison again here, this is out the front window, as you can see here, and then there's out the front window of the camera on the rear view mirror. It's really a stunning display difference. And with this, I love the fact it has the split screen. As you can see here, I can see what's behind me and what's in front of me at the same time. Also, what's cool is the range of motion your camera has. So as you see here, I'm seeing what's behind me now. I can scroll up or down to increase or decrease or widen my range of view. That goes for the front camera as well. As you can see here, this is what's out in front of me, and I can still scroll higher or lower to see. If you haven't yet gotten a rear view camera for your Cybertruck, I'd highly recommend this model. You can't go wrong with it. If you do, use my discount code CHARISMA and you'll receive 20% off when you purchase this from the Tesstudio site. As always, thanks for watching the video. I'll see you on the comparison in just a few days.